What's up, NBA fans? Dom2K on the mic, and today we're here to talk about 4 playoff series that got really close to happening. Now, this is not to be confused with the video I came out with a couple of months ago called 4 playoff series we were robbed of, because technically those didn't really get close to happening. Those were just hypothetical matchups that I would have liked to have seen happen. However, this video is going to talk about some that, if a shot would have went in, or if a call happened differently, or just a couple of things happened a little differently, we could have ended up with these playoff matchups. I think you're going to find that all 4 of these probably would have been pretty epic had they have happened, and there's not much more to say about it. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Number 4, 2012 NBA Finals, Celtics vs Spurs. Now, at the time that this series almost happened, people really didn't want to see it. They wanted to see the young and spry Heat and Thunder, which is what we actually got. I remember when it seemed like this series was on its way to happening, there were memes about this being the senior citizen meeting because, of course, pretty much everybody was out of their primes by that time. However, Kevin Garnett and Tim Duncan just retired last season, and I think now, 4 years later, we would have probably really appreciated seeing Kevin Garnett and Tim Duncan playing in the NBA Finals, and this is how it could have happened. So the Celtics vs Heat 2012 Eastern Conference Finals actually turned out way more competitive than people expected it to. The year before that, Miami handled Boston pretty handily and they beat them in 5 games. This season, not only did Boston come in a year older, but they came in with some injuries as well. They were missing Jeff Green to heart surgery, they were missing players like Jermaine O'Neal. There was just an assortment of injuries, and it was basically just the big 4 left with not a whole lot of great support around them. And when the Miami Heat went up 2-0, it really looked like they were going to handle Boston pretty easily. However, Boston fought back and tied the series. In Game 4, Wade almost hit a game winner that would have put them up 3-1, but it didn't happen that way. Boston wins Game 5 by virtue of that incredible 3-pointer by Paul Pierce right in the face of LeBron James, and by that point it just seems destined for Boston to go back to the NBA Finals. Kevin Garnett is putting everything he has into this playoff run as he basically turned back the clock in this series. Boston was going home with a lead 3-2, and it just kind of seemed like they were ready to send LeBron James home again as they had been doing in the previous years. Now, we all know LeBron James responded with one of the greatest playoff performances of all time, but if that doesn't happen and Boston gets Miami to submit on the home floor, Boston is in the NBA Finals. Meanwhile, in the Western Conference Finals, the Spurs had a nice 2-0 lead on the Thunder. They were looking like the more experienced team, the Thunder was still looking young, like they had some time to develop before they beat the Spurs, and San Antonio had their chances because although all we remember is that the Thunder came back and won 4 games straight, those 3 of those 4 games were actually pretty close. And the thing that people don't remember is that in Game 6, the Spurs held the lead going into halftime 63-48, so that's a pretty nice lead, especially for a veteran team. It looked like they were ready to handle business on the road, and had they have done that, they would have taken it back to San Antonio for Game 7, which they had a really good chance of winning. And then before you know it, you have the Spurs and Celtics in the NBA Finals in 2012. Now look, I'm well aware that people wanted to see Kevin Durant and LeBron James in the NBA Finals. I'm pretty sure nobody else outside of Celtics and Spurs fans really wanted to see the 2012 matchup. I just thought it was interesting that Kevin Garnett and Tim Duncan really could have solidified a rivalry by finally meeting each other in the NBA Finals. Albeit they were definitely out of their primes by that time, you know what, better late than never, and I'm sure we could definitely appreciate that now that they're gone for good. We're never going to see them play again. Number 3. 2006 Eastern Conference Finals, Heat vs Cavs. So here we are 10 years later in the year 2016, and it's finally looking like we might get to see a Dwayne Wade and LeBron James playoff matchup because the Cavaliers and Bulls both have pretty good shots at making the Eastern Conference Finals. As a matter of fact, the Cavaliers are probably already a lock for that. However, I think we can all agree that it would be probably bittersweet right now to see LeBron James and Wade finally play because, well, neither one of them are in their primes. I mean, LeBron is still the game's greatest and Wade is still really good, but they're not at their best anymore. However, 10 years ago, we were literally only 1 game from seeing these guys play for a chance to go to the NBA Finals. And of course, this being only a few years after they were drafted, and of course all the competition that was going on, those two at the, reaching the height of their games, it would have been amazing. And here's how that could have happened. So by now, all anybody ever remembers about LeBron James and the Pistons is that LeBron James basically completely took over that series in 2007 to take that Cavaliers roster to the NBA Finals. However, people really forget about 2006 where they lost in a 7-game series to the Pistons, but they were so close to winning it. So as that series started, everything was going according to plan. The Pistons were the more complete team, and they won as they took a 2-0 lead. However, led by LeBron James, the Cavaliers came storming back and they won 3 games straight, and 2 of those were very close as they only happened by 2 points. So by this point, the Cavaliers look like they're more than ready to go ahead and upset the Detroit Pistons. They're up 3-2, they have the Game 6 in Cleveland, everything is set and they can go to the Eastern Conference Finals. Meanwhile, the Miami Heat disposed of the Nets pretty easily in a 5-game series, so the Miami Heat are sitting there waiting for them, and the Cavaliers got so damn close. Detroit won Game 6 84-82. Even the smallest twist of fate in that type of game could have had the Cavaliers in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Miami Heat, and boy, I can't even tell you how much fun it would have been to see both of those two in their prime playing against each other to go to the NBA Finals, and it was so close to being a reality. Of course, the Miami Heat had the better team. You had Dwayne Wade and Shaq, so they would have still went to the NBA Finals. However, LeBron James still would have kept the Cavaliers competitive because obviously we saw him do it against the Pistons. We saw him do it against many teams with not much help there. So still would have been a very fun series. Would have been very fun to see them go at it. And even if we do end up seeing that finally happen this season, it definitely is not what it would have been 10 years ago. So we're just going to have to live with the fact that we missed out on that. Number 2. The 2009 NBA Finals, Cavs vs. Lakers. So we're currently going through our first season without Kobe Bryant in about 2 decades, and it still burns that we did not get to see Kobe Bryant and LeBron James play in the NBA Finals due to the fact that they were both on top of the league for a pretty long time at the same time. They just could not meet. However, in 2009, the conditions were so perfect that the NBA was actually making commercials. I know a lot of you remember that puppet commercial between Kobe and LeBron. They expected that finals, and they had good reason to expect it because the Boston Celtics had pretty much been knocked out of finals contention when Kevin Garnett had the knee injury. He was the defensive anchor, their intensity, and without him they just were probably not an NBA Finals team. So for LeBron James, he was really close to the top of his game at this time. He had just won the MVP award and he was still trying to bring that first championship to Cleveland. The competitive climate was perfect because meanwhile on the other side, Kobe Bryant had made it pretty clear that he was just not going to fail again this year after losing so tough in Boston the year before that. He was still looking to win his first ring without Shaq, and it was just perfect. Both players had an extreme amount to prove. And the Cavaliers got busy in the playoffs. I don't know how many of you remember that 2009 run, but before the Eastern Conference Finals, the Cavaliers were perfect. They had won all 8 of their games by an average of about 16 points a game. They just completely dominated the competition, and when they played the Orlando Magic in the Eastern Conference Finals, it did not look much different because here's something that people forget. You remember that Dwight Howard pretty much tore the Cavaliers apart, but in Game 1, not only were the Cavaliers coming into that undefeated, they led at halftime 63-48 by virtue of that, crazy half-court shot by Mo Williams. So everything just seemed like it was going perfectly, and by that point, we could go ahead and pop champagne because Kobe and LeBron was happening. The crazy thing about that game is that the Orlando Magic didn't even get their first lead of the game until the 10-minute mark in the 4th quarter, so it took them all game to come back, and of course they ended up doing so. Rashard Lewis hit that clutch go-ahead bucket, and the Cavaliers were extremely stunned. From that point, the Cavaliers never really recovered because they just kind of seemed like they had lost their championship swagger. They just barely beat the Magic in Game 2, and Orlando would go on to take a 3-1 lead. But that all could have turned out very differently because Game 4, where the Cleveland Cavaliers were trying to tie this series, that was a really close game. Cleveland ended up losing by 2 in overtime, but before that, they were actually leading with 8 seconds to go in the 4th quarter. Rashard Lewis was so clutch back then, and he actually hit the bucket to put him up, and then it was free throws, and all this stuff happened. Point here is that things could have went differently in that game, and if the Cavaliers tie right there and they win Game 5, who knows what happens for the rest of that series? Who knows if the Cavaliers finally get it together and actually beat the Orlando Magic? Point is, it was very close to happening, and it really should have happened. We would have had that LeBron James and Kobe Bryant matchup with a lot on the line. We got LeBron James' first championship with Cleveland on the line, and it's his MVP season, and as I said before, Kobe trying to get that first ring without Shaq would have been very beautiful to see, but it just was not in the cards. Number 1, 1997 NBA Finals, Rockets vs. Bulls. So you know how there's this whole part of history where Michael Jordan retires and Hakeem Olajuwon repeats, and then there's a thing where they're saying, well, if Michael Jordan stayed, maybe he would have won 8 championships in a row, and this big hole in NBA history that will never be filled. Well, what if I told you this actually could have still happened after Michael Jordan came back, and it almost did happen? This Rockets roster was slightly different than the one that won the NBA championships. Yeah, they still had Clyde Drexler, but they also had Charles Barkley, who was not in his prime anymore, but his numbers were still actually pretty decent for the time. And as you would expect, this team made it pretty deep into the playoffs. They got all the way to face the Utah Jazz in the Western Conference Finals, and the series had a lot of clutch moments in it and, some turning points. The Rockets started the series down 0-2, but they managed to tie it by virtue of a game-winning three-pointer in Game 4, so there was a lot going into Game 5, which they lost by 5 points. However, what everybody probably remembers about this series, and even if you didn't know what this series was, you've probably seen this shot where John Stockton hits that straightaway three-pointer to send the Jazz to the NBA Finals. Now, there's the turning point, because if that three doesn't go in, the Rockets and Jazz are headed for an overtime, and who knows who wins there. And if the Rockets do end up winning that series, then we have a Game 7 on our hands, and nobody ever knows how those are going to turn out. But if it does go in favor of the Houston Rockets, then we have a matchup between the Rockets and Bulls in the '97 NBA Finals instead of the Jazz and Bulls. Now, try to wrap your head around this. It would have been a series with Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and Dennis versus Hakeem Olajuwon, Charles Barkley, and Clyde Drexler. Albeit, like I said, Drexler and Barkley not in their prime anymore, obviously, but still would have been fun to see all those names in the NBA Finals. And it might have given us some idea of what would have happened had Michael Jordan not have retired in those 2 seasons. Now, these teams played in the regular season, of course, 2 times. Both teams blew each other out. Hakeem Olajuwon had his regular dominant stat line against the Bulls, and that's what makes it so hard. You always wonder what the Bulls would have done to stop Hakeem Olajuwon, and we could have definitely had the answer to that here, but, we're never gonna know. And it really sucks that we didn't get to see this one, because for some reason I just feel like history needed at least one NBA Finals matchup between Michael Jordan and Hakeem Olajuwon, and what better way to have that when you have Charles Barkley on that side as well with Clyde Drexler. I just think that would have been really cool. Anyways, let's not stay depressed too long over these matchups, because we've gotten plenty of other nice matchups in place of those. These are just some that got really close to happening, and a twisted fate, different calls, shot rims in or doesn't, fouls, whatever could possibly happen. These playoff series were waiting on the other side for us as the alternatives. I personally would have liked to see them all, but maybe you guys like what we got instead. If there's any playoff matchups you guys know of that almost happened, feel free to comment those, because I'm always on the lookout for stuff I don't know about. I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something. Hit like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed. I'm Dom2K, and I'll see you guys in the next video.